honestly, it sounds almost so silly to say, but there's a lot of restaurants that are feeling the pain of racism, where people are literally not patroning Chinese restaurants. They're not patroning Asian restaurants because of just straight up racism around the coronavirus.
I love that I can count on AOC to teach me new words that don't exist. Patroning the restaurant. Now, maybe this is a slang that I have not yet ever been introduced to, but I think she means patronizing. And I think that AOC also didn't learn that much in English class because maybe she was so focused on getting that high school science prize that she was bragging about on Twitter to millions of people a few weeks ago. Okay. But also her overall contention here that people aren't going into Asian restaurants, mostly Chinese, I'm assuming some Japanese restaurants too, Korean restaurants, out of racism, just goes to show you that the left really doesn't even understand what racism means anymore. This has been the case for a long time. They've expanded racism beyond what a normal definition of it, what our understood definition of it had been for a long time. If people aren't going to a Chinese restaurant because they're concerned that there have been the highest number of cases in China and that there could be contacts because people could be visiting family, because there could be people traveling back and forth. Now, I know a lot of people would say, Buck, a lot of Chinese restaurants are run by people born in America, never step out. True, but it's not that the people that are worried, and they're scared. They're not worried, or rather, they're not making that decision because they have anything against Chinese people. They don't like Chinese people. That would be racism. They're just scared, and they're making a decision based on fear, but it's fear of getting exposure to a virus that we're all being told by the media right now is going to come for all of us any day now. And it's not in any way rooted in disdain or distaste or dislike of another race. That's racism. The same problem we've seen now when they discuss how we shouldn't call it Wuhan virus. No, we should call it Wuhan virus because that's what we do. We tend to call outbreaks of different viruses by names that are based in their point of origination, or at least where they're first discovered. Zika, Lyme, Ebola, West Nile, influenza. Who even knows where influenza comes from as a term? Well, as we know, the flu has probably been around. The first description of it, I think, it is believed to have been written about by Hippocrates, the father of the Hippocratic Oath. And it was the cough of, I think it was Perinthus in the 5th century BC. If I get this right, I'm pretty awesome, by the way, because we're going deep in the memory banks here. That was the first time that Hippocrates wrote about what was believed to be a flu. The term influenza, which is where we get flu from, which is how we generally refer to all these different viruses, comes from 14th century Italians who thought that it was the influence, that's influenza, the influence of the stars and sort of the celestial on people, that's where the sickness was coming from. Believe it or not, that was in the 14th century what they were thinking, that there was some cosmic connection to this, and it was the influence of the stars. So that's where we get the term. I've also talked about epidemic and pandemic, right? Epidemic on the people, pandemic all the people, descriptions for severity of outbreaks of these diseases on the people, the demos. Also where we get the word democracy. So AOC saying it's racist is just yet again another time when wokeness interferes with normal brain function. It's obviously not racist. People are not. Now, it could be wrong. They could be overreacting, but it's not because all of a sudden they've discovered that they don't like people from China. It's because they associate people from China with a higher incidence of this disease because it is the epicenter of this. And they just want to limit their exposure as much as possible. We're being told to avoid all people. We're being told to avoid all human contact, with this social distancing policy as much as we can. Although, how much can we really even do that? When you have people that scared, they're going to make decisions that go above and beyond. I ordered Chinese food last week. I'll go into Chinese restaurants all over the place. I think that that's silly. But I'm just saying it's not rooted in racism. It's just rooted in fear of exposure. People would be afraid. Would I go to Italy right now? No. Am I anti-Italian? No. Am I racist against it? By the way, China is really a nationality, not a race, but nonetheless. Am I racist against Italian people? Absolutely not.
Hi, Senator. As someone from Russia, a country that was greatly impacted by the negative effects of socialism, what assurances can you offer myself and other people impacted by socialism that democratic socialism will not have the same results?
Good. Thank you for the question, Martha. Martha? Margaret. Okay. What happened and existed in the Soviet Union was not socialism.
That would definitely be news to the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. That would be news to them. It would be news to the founders of the Soviet Union, who all spent decades in the socialist underground, not just in what then became the Soviet Union, but in Germany, in the UK, in Switzerland, bouncing all around Europe, spreading the poison of socialist ideology. It would be news to them. It would be news to a young Yosef Zhugashvili from Georgia, who in early days of his adult life was self-describing as a social democrat. That's right. Not even just a socialist, a social democrat, right along with Bernie Sanders. It would be a fascinating experiment, or it would really prove the point about Bernie Sanders' politics if we could just ask him to explain what was wrong in the Soviet Union? Why did socialism go bad? I would love to hear, and if somebody really drilled down on it, because I don't think he would be able to answer the question. He would have to dodge. He'd have to weave around. He'd just start saying, Sweden, Sweden's great. Look at Sweden. But Sweden is not a socialist country. It's a country with a large welfare state, high taxation, a large social welfare system, but actually has an economy that runs on free market principles and in some ways is more corporate friendly and more free market friendly than America is. Same thing with Denmark. So I would like to have somebody ask Bernie Sanders, well, why was the Soviet Union not socialist? In fact, most people would argue that the most pure distillation of socialist principles ever were, in fact, the founding ideals of the Soviet Union. I mean, they wanted true radical equality. That was at least what they started out with. As we know, this then morphed into a class of elites who were living a completely separate and much more luxurious, although not even that luxurious really, because they had such crappy standard of living in the Soviet Union because they couldn't produce anything. But we know that it all fell apart. It turned into a nightmare. It turned into a massive slave state, essentially, where everybody was working for the state, and this state employees became their overlords, and it was tyrannical and totalitarian. I wonder if Bernie Sanders, somebody should ask him, have you read the great anti-Soviet works? I can guarantee you Bernie Sanders has not read Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago. Guarantee it. I can guarantee you Bernie Sanders has not read, if you want to bring it into the American context, Whittaker Chambers' Witness. I'm sure he has read the Communist Manifesto and a bunch of those origin documents, if you will, for communism and socialism, but he doesn't really understand, because he's a true believer. He doesn't really understand why these things have failed. Because if he understood why they've failed, then he would have to admit that there is a common thread in all these socialist systems that is always the problem. That there is a group that thinks they have the answers, they have the plan. You often call it in socialist analysis, the plan, and the plan must be instituted by the state to create equality and better living conditions for everyone according to this plan. And they need force and authority to be able to do that. And in doing so, they eliminate freedom. They take away individual choice. They remove signals from the market, most importantly, price, which is just individuals interacting freely with one another to their own benefit. It ignores human nature, which is rooted in self-interest, and assumes that the group or the class or the political party of experts implementing the plan know what they're doing, have the best interests of the people at heart, and understand how to implement this plan, and will respond to failures with better ideas. It always fails. The press is being wildly irresponsible here as we try to figure out what's next with this coronavirus situation. I have to deep dive into this with you today. We'll work through all the angles together. I really still stick to take precautions, take it seriously. Everyone needs to calm down. Or not everybody, but people that are acting like this is the zombie apocalypse. And there really are people that are taking that approach. They think that if they don't get the last mask from their local drugstore or something, that somehow they're not going to be one of those who makes it through this. We have dealt with pandemics before as a species. We will deal with pandemics again. There are some takeaways from all of this. One of my most important ones is perhaps we shouldn't focus so much on science that doesn't really matter and doesn't affect any of our lives. Perhaps there shouldn't be this obsession with climate change and CO2 emissions when we all know that it's just a matter of time. Any given year, millions and millions of people could contract a truly high mortality, virulent pathogen. And then all of a sudden we realize, wow, maybe we should have spent that money on something else. Maybe we could have taken a different approach. And I think hopefully this is one of these moments where we start to think about where we should really put our priority. The Green New Deal, all that stuff, that's a fake religious belief that they won't admit as a religious belief. It has nothing to do with actually saving the world or saving the planet. These people are absurd. Dealing with coronavirus, this is very real. Pandemic disease is very real. And I assure you, if we were to go back and look at the archives of this show, I believe I was asked a question maybe even last summer, what scares you? And I remember this now. I said, pandemic disease scares me. That's something that we have to be serious about, and that's where we are now. The Dow down almost, 2,000 points on a plunge today related to fears over this virus, which there's a whole lot that goes into that. Fears over the virus, but also a decision about oil production with OPEC and OPEC Plus. I'll give you some of that storyline as well, just so we're all up to speed on it. But I just wanted to start today by telling you that, the media really cannot resist this opportunity to slowly drag the public through a collective panic attack, because it's a lazy way to drive audience, to get clicks, to get viewers, and to hysterically trash Trump all day long. Plus, somehow we are supposed to come away from all of this thinking that confused, corrupt, inept Joe Biden would do so much better, that Joe Biden would be saving us, whereas Trump is leading us into disaster. I mean, this is entirely unserious. This is, and it's reckless. It's damaging. It's not just something that I think we should hold them to account for in terms of the politics, but also there are real effects here. I mean, Dr. Drew in that clip was talking about how people's lives are being upended. There are going to be businesses might not recover, some of them, from this. There are places now that they're in their busy season. Huge concerts are being canceled, huge gatherings, hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue at South by Southwest in Austin. Say hi to all of our folks down in KLBJ Austin. Hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue just gone, basically. There's all this additional quarantine from over the weekend that has taken place in northern Italy. About a quarter of all of Italy is now technically under quarantine. It also has one of the oldest populations in the world. I would note that if the Chinese, in a country, a very densely packed country of now, do you believe the Chinese numbers? Probably not. Maybe they're just trying to game the system and hope that their economy will not be as badly bruised by this if they downplay the severity of the cases in their own country. That's possible. But if you believe some of the Chinese numbers, that's a huge if, they have been able to turn the curve in the other direction now, so that there are fewer and fewer, not less, fewer and fewer cases of this with each passing day. And if they can do that in a billion plus person, often very densely packed together China, it's certainly possible to get this under control in other places. So the Dow plummeting now has all these people who are prophets of doom. And I find that to be very lazy. You notice I don't come on the radio show and day after day find some way to try to frighten people all the time. There are other shows that really, and they're conservatives, and they do that all the time. The country's going to hell. Everything's terrible. You know, the libs are ruining everything, and any day now we're going to no longer have a constitution. There are real threats. There are real concerns. I think the rise of socialism is something, even with Bernie Sanders not becoming necessarily the Democrat primary opponent, it's something we have to take very seriously in this country and look at why we go to this point, why we would repeat these mistakes made in the past by so many other countries and expand upon these socialist mistakes in our own country, in our own economy. But all that said, I don't show up here every day and tell you that, we're all going to die, or that, the caliphate is going to take over America any day, or there's all kinds of things. Although it is true, and I like to say this, we are all going to die. That's a fact. We're just not all going to die from coronavirus. In fact, very, very few of us, I think, in the overall percentage will succumb to coronavirus. In a sense, this is a reminder in our modern era where we all see life expectancy. We see life expectancy getting higher generally. I know there's been a drop in life expectancy in America for white males because of opioid addiction specifically and the deaths from it. But overall, if you look at the last 100 years or so, we're living longer and healthier, longer and healthier, longer and healthier. That's our expectation. And we get into this mindset of everything is going to keep getting better, everything's going to keep getting stronger. We've had a stock market now that has been essentially going up for 10 years, and some people would say that it's really a 20-year bull market with a blip in it. One thing that I do love is watching all these different supposed experts in the market and in investing go on TV and tell us things that are either so obvious that they don't really need to be said, or that are so stupid I'm surprised anybody would go on TV to say it. And this is their job, is to tell us about, sometimes the market goes up, sometimes the market goes down. Thanks, Bob. So this is where we are now. Recognizing that markets do come down, recognizing that pandemic disease is real, that there are still challenges even in our incredibly comfortable modern world, especially in the developed world, especially here in America. We are all mortal, and we are having to think about that and face that in a way we haven't in a long time. We have not had a draft for the military in how many decades? We've had a very small percentage of this country that is effectively the warrior class of America. They are our warriors. They go, they choose to fight America's battles at home and abroad. I mean, they choose to be the ones who are defending us, defending the Constitution. We have not had a draft in many decades, and we have not had a mass casualty war along the lines of what we saw in the early to mid 20th century in a very long time as well, right? I mean, you'd have to go back to Vietnam, and that was mass casualties stretched over many years. We have gotten very comfortable. We've gotten, as a country, I think a little bit soft about our expectations of what the future is going to be like and how there's not going to be that much struggle. I mean, this is why you've had in the last couple of years completely made up controversies about Trump working with the Russians, and this captured the American imagination of the left, of Democrats for sure, and we had to sit through this and fight through this lunacy. But that's really only possible because we weren't fighting a huge war, because we weren't in the midst of a depression or a major recession, because there weren't things that were keeping us up late at night that were imminent threats to our safety, to our family, to our well-being in the way that other generations have dealt with. So I think our mentality had gotten a little bit soft, as evidenced by all the different things that we spend, the media spends time talking to you about, focusing on, the latest in the transgender, equality movement, or whether women should be able to compete in men's sports, or just think of any issue that's gotten a hyper focus from the media that often we have to engage with on the right, try to refute, try to say, no, that's not a good idea. No, we shouldn't be so. Green New Deal is perhaps the best example of this. I mean, that's just a giant lunacy fest. It makes no sense whatsoever. But we had real time spent on this issue. Yeah, we're going to rebuild every building in the country. We're going to dramatically transform our economy. We forget sometimes that the economy can be a somewhat fragile thing. I mean, there have been empires, there have been great states of the past, nation states where, or in the pre-nation state, pre-Westphalian era, just the hegemon all of a sudden, collapses slowly, then suddenly, right? That's what ends up being the epitaph, is that it took a while and it didn't really, and then all of a sudden, boom, gone. So to talk about moving trillions of dollars around in the healthcare system or trillions of dollars around because of the Green New Deal, these were only conversations that we could have because everything in this country was seeming to trend in the right direction, despite, and now really think, now that we have a real crisis at least to deal with, think about all the false crises we've had to deal with in the last 3 years. And this is one of the problems that the media has created, is that, of course, I'm skeptical of any media criticism of Trump's response to coronavirus, because all they do is criticize it. They don't take a step back and call balls and strikes. They don't pick their shots. It's everything Trump does is horrible. Every decision he makes, whether it was stopping the flights in from China. I remember, I've actually got a whole thread of all these different news stories. Experts say this is not a good idea. Experts say, well, now we're talking about experts saying that we should have bigger and bigger lockdowns and don't get on a cruise ship. You're hearing experts say things like that. Don't do it. And you don't need to tell me that, by the way. There are a few things that sound more hellish to me these days than being stuck on a cruise ship for a few weeks in quarantine, stuck in my cruise ship room. I would lose my mind. So I've never been a cruise person. It's not my cup of tea, but especially these days, it's not a particularly good idea. I think we all can understand why. So I sit here and I try to take the most fair-minded, objective assessment of this current situation as I can. And I really do believe that we're going to be okay. We're going to get through this. And there are people who you have to remember, and this goes back to what I told you last week, they are rooting for failure here. And part of rooting for failure is it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if they get people more scared, if they create enough anxiety, then that alone affects decision-making, affects the way people go about their daily lives, business investment, hiring, all these different things, so that the fondest wish, the greatest hope of the Democrats is Trump will go into re-election in the midst of a recession. Some have been open about that. Some have been willing to say that they just want there to be a recession. They don't care how painful that is for Americans and what that really means for us. Many of them are hoping that that's what's going to happen. They're hoping for a recession. Are they hoping for there to be real grounds based on the numbers to say that Trump let coronavirus get out of control here? I'd like to think the answer is no, but unfortunately, I believe there are people who would make that trade-off because they think that Trump is the greatest threat to this country that has ever existed, which is something only crazy people can think, but they do believe it. There are millions and millions of Democrats, of leftists, who have adopted that as their core belief, their core position on all things going on in the country. Trump is the single biggest threat. And so they can't objectively talk about any of this stuff. And that's why the media just just factors into this hysteria and adds to it constantly when, you look at where we are right now, you look at the growth in cases in this country. It's going to get worse before it gets better, but it's going to get better, and it's not going to be that bad. I think if that changes, we'll have a conversation about that too. Why can't everyone just be an adult about this in the media? Why can't everyone just put aside how much they hate Trump? We're going to talk more about Biden later on in the show. Does anyone really think that Joe Biden has great judgment and they'd feel so much better? If you would sleep better at night knowing Joe Biden is president right now instead of Trump, I'd like to know why. Unless Burisma is writing you checks for $80,000 a month to do nothing, I want to know why you think Joe Biden would be better in this role. What evidence is there for it? Joe Biden is a mediocrity who has just done whatever he's had to do his entire career to keep getting elected. That's all he does. That's all he cares about. No leadership, no good judgment, not an intellectual, not even particularly smart, not particularly ethical, not inspiring. But that's what you were supposed to take away from so much of this criticism over Trump doesn't take it seriously to hear what he said in this press conference. Because Joe Biden would be so much better? That's an unserious position. This is where you have to remind yourself, if you're somebody in the public eye, you could always be recorded and this could always be shown anywhere. Cenk, however, recorded this interaction himself with an airline employee when there's a delay and then uploaded it to the internet as though he's like the hero here. Play whatever the Cenk the Jerk clip is.
Where's the plane? Where's the plane? Is there a plane? Where is it? Where's the plane? You know, but listen, if we just sit here and take it, they'd have us here until 6 in the morning, and then they'd fuck us even harder, okay? So I need to, you're a supervisor, aren't you? Where's the plane?
Sorry, I'm not going to answer your question.
No, I know, because I've been here for 4 hours. Don't give me this. Where's the plane?
I mean, oh, what a jerk. Yeah. Does he think that the woman who's sitting there at the computer is just intentionally like not bringing the plane on time? Now, I do understand the frustration with airlines I do think that airlines play games. I mean, I know that they do when they're not really telling people what they already know because they kind of want to see if maybe things will get better, if the timeline will be condensed. There could be more streamlined communication. I totally get that. But by the way, that Cenk clip goes on much longer, and he's berating this person and yelling at her. I would just note that this is somebody whose whole public mantra is to help the working class, and that socialism would be better for America, and that we should all have socialism, and it's so great. There is this constant pretense among people on the left that they care about everybody that they say is oppressed, whether it's minorities or women or whoever it may be. But more than that, or more specifically in this discussion, that they care so much about the everyday working people in America. I just think there's a lot of very clear evidence that that's just not true. They really don't care. They like to pretend that they care. They like to have long philosophical conversations about the possibility of caring about people who work long hours for not a lot of pay. But when they actually have to interact with them and deal with them, they're often, I mean, this is what you get with MSNBC and these are liberal millionaires. I mean, Cenk raised $20 million for the Young Turks from some left-wing Pierre Omidyar guy who also, I think, funded The Intercept. I might be wrong on this, but he's raised all this money. I'm sure he's paying himself probably $1 million a year, maybe $500,000 a year to run the Young Turks. These are rich people who talk constantly about how much they care about the poor and the oppressed. But then when they really get to interact with the oppressed or the working people, they show you who they really are. And I think when people show you who they are, we should remember that. We should not just skip past it and assume that maybe they were, having a bad day or something else. So Cenk's a jerk, as I've been telling you all along, and the Young Turks is the worst left-wing media organization on the internet, which says a lot. I mean, that's a pretty competitive space to be the worst of the left on the internet, but they're definitely there. The same media that has been lighting their credibility on fire for years to attack the Trump administration now turns around and says, "Why don't you believe everything we say about this and that none of it is political?" Well, because they've cried wolf, because they have sold their credibility. They've sold their credibility for short-term audience gain, for placating the Trump deranged left. That is what they have been doing. So, of course, we take that into account. But, I mean, that was very, very troubling. I mean, look, here's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Jim Acosta is out there. And, Jim, I don't know Jim Acosta. I got to tell you, it's amazing to me that CNN thinks that this isn't just completely, that he's not an example of something that he just destroys their credibility. I mean, if anyone's being honest, Jim Acosta is an activist. He's playing games all the time. But here he is. He has access to the President of the United States, and he does have, unfortunately, a very large platform from which to inform the American public. And he is asked, as a White House correspondent meant to convey information to the public after the president gives a speech from the Oval Office, he is asked to, bring context and analysis to it that's helpful at a time of real national concern. And here is what he does with that ability. Play clip 10.
At one point during this address, the president referred to the coronavirus as a, quote, foreign virus. That I think was interesting because as I was talking to sources earlier this evening, one of the points that the president wanted to make tonight, wanted to get across to Americans, is that this virus did not start here, but that they're dealing with it. Now, why the president would go as far as to describe it as a foreign virus, that is something we'll also be asking questions about. But it should be pointed out that Stephen Miller, who is an immigration hardliner who advises the president, is one of his top domestic policy advisors and speechwriters, was a driving force in writing the speech. And I think it's going to it's going to come across to a lot of Americans as smacking of xenophobia.
What a bunch of morons. I mean, really. It is a Chinese virus. It did come from China. And the Chinese government suppressed information in the beginning that could have given the whole world a head start on developing tests, vaccines, cordoning off people, creating measures to help with public safety. Yeah, that's all. That's true. That's real. And the Chinese government is actively lying to its own population, trying to blame America for this. That's happening right now. There is a Chinese government propaganda effort to blame America because this is going to have, global financial implications. Could last for quite a while. The implications of it. I mean, who knows? I mean, no one really knows how long this whole thing's going to continue on in any respect. So that could happen. And now we look at this and we say to ourselves, okay, well, should we just allow the Chinese government to rewrite history and lie? Should they be able to tell the whole world, including their own population, that America is responsible for this? This happened because someone in China was selling rare animals in what's called was being called a wet market, an open air market in Wuhan City, in Hubei province in China. That's what, or it escaped from the Virology Institute that happens to be 10 miles away, which wouldn't be the first time that a infectious virus has escaped from that institute at all. It's one of those two things. So yeah, it's Chinese. Why can't we speak about this honestly? No one's blaming the Chinese people for it, but we're trying to describe a thing. And why do they waste our time getting into this? I mean, look, CNN. You'd think that now they'd raise the bar. Now they'd be serious. They can't. You shouldn't trust them. You shouldn't respect them. So sports are in rough shape right now. We got cancellations. We just talked about the NHL suspending, as producer Mark has pointed out, suspending the season. Other leagues are suspending. I mean, if they suspend long enough, it's going to be basically canceled. I wanted to bring in Clay Travis to talk to that issue, but also his thoughts on just everything we're facing right now. Clay is the host of Outkick the Coverage, very popular podcast, and also the author of the book Republicans Buy Sneakers Too. Clay, thanks for joining us. Are you in Nashville right now?
I am in Nashville. Appreciate you having me, my man.
Yeah. So tell me what's going on here, first off, with this NBA player who tested positive. I saw something that he also had made a joke earlier about having coronavirus, and it turned out he did. What can you tell us about what's going on with the NBA and coronavirus?
Yeah, Rudy Gobert is a player for the Utah Jazz, and he had made a joke a couple of days ago at a press conference about the coronavirus by rubbing his hand all over the microphones that he was being interviewed on as he walked out. And obviously it was lighthearted. He was not taking it seriously. He got the coronavirus. He also has given it to at least one of his teammates. And obviously this has since spiraled into a major issue in the world of sports and beyond, because with the quarantine situation that everybody has, once one player on one team gets it, that entire team is required to quarantine, and so are, to a certain extent, all of the players who played against that player. So it has spiraled into a ongoing, I think it's fair to say, crisis for the world of sports, which is unlike anything I've ever seen before, where one by one different leagues and different tournaments are making the decision basically to call off their games.
What does this mean, you think? Look, there's so many angles on this one, but let's start with just the health of the leagues, pardon the expression, but the financial impact this is going to have in arenas. I saw something that Mark Cuban is making an effort, he says, for at least for the Mavericks, to take care of hourly employees who are obviously going to be in really rough shape with the season being shut down. What can you tell us about how they're trying to mitigate the impact economically?
Well, I think that's a big challenge, right? And honestly, this is me putting my lawyer hat on. I'm already kind of, purely from a legal perspective, utterly fascinated to see what all these lawsuits and insurance contracts are going to look like. Because you could probably imagine this. For years and years, pro sports leagues have been taking out insurance in the event that something wild happens, which necessitates games not taking place, maybe the cancellation of seasons, and trying to figure out what the economic value of that would be. You know, you probably pay, what do you think? I mean, I don't even know. I'd love to get an insurance expert on, but several $1 million to ensure that your season is going to continue to take place, but your payoff is going to be massive in the event that it happens. And it kind of reminds me of in terms of the unlikelihood of it, of what happened after 9/11. When for lawyers out there, they'll remember there was a big lawsuit over whether the two planes that hit the Twin Towers were one event or two events, because it impacted in a big way what sort of recovery there was going to be under the insurance contract. And I don't even remember what the resolution of that case was, but you think about the 30 different places out there, right? The 30 different NBA arenas and the 30 different teams and all of the different aspects of that they will have set up, and all the lawsuits that will unspool. It's just kind of massive to think about.
Now, are there any leagues that are right now planning to sort of just continue with contingency operations with no fans in the stands going forward? I mean, how are adaptations working here for any other sports leagues or any other events?
It's happening so quickly, honestly, that if I haven't checked my phone, I almost hesitate to say, because something might have happened in the last 5 minutes.
Yeah, that actually just happened to me. I said the NHL is thinking about canceling, and then we came back from a break, and then turns out they're canceling.
Yeah, right. So I mean, I think that's the challenge, Buck, right now, is that literally it's almost impossible to keep up with how quickly this story is moving.
Now, I've also seen, you're somebody who has been pretty vocal on social media, and I'll just say, I mean, you and I haven't talked about this yet. I've been taking the position that, this is a be vigilant, take the precautions, but they're really, people say there's no need to panic, and that almost then incites panic. It's like Will Ferrell in Old School when he says, keep your composure, and he's like flinging the chair around the locker room and freaking out. Yeah. I think that there's a psychological effect that it has when people say don't, but I really don't, I think sometimes there can be a need for panic. There can be a need for everybody to hit the exits, and we're not there. I don't think we're anywhere close to there. Walk me through where, your evolution and thinking about the risks here, as somebody who pays very close attention to the news, has been vocal about this. Where'd you start? And after what we saw last night from President Trump, and how worried are you, man? I mean, that's really the question.
I am not incredibly worried, all right? I think it's an interesting question, and let me just take a step back. I tend to be a guy, and you probably are as well because you're a smart guy. When I was a kid, I was scared of everything, right? Like a young kid, because you're aware that there is danger in the world, but you lack the ability to unpack probabilities and statistics of what that danger represents. So you're willing to go into the ocean a little bit. There's sharks out there, but you're not smart enough to understand what the chances are of a shark actually biting you, right? And so I was terrified of things like that as a kid. And as I got older, I used sort of my fear as the way that I would weaponize against it is by diving into facts and data in order to try to uncover the answer there, right? And so I believe that most of us are very safe, right, from this pandemic. Right now, according to the most recent data I've seen, there are 10 people in serious or critical condition in the entirety of the country. And there are 38 deaths, I believe. What's scary is if we went in the direction of Italy, which is about 75 times as bad when you adjust for per capita as what we have in the country right now, that would change. My hope is that we're going to move more towards what South Korea and China, how we're able to do in terms of virtually eradicating the outbreak in their countries, as opposed to towards Italy and Europe. And I think what Trump has done is basically say, hey, Europe is a powder keg right now. It's in danger of becoming China-like. And so we need to keep people from coming from Europe to our country and reigniting more cases going forward.
And in terms of the statistics on mortality rate and all the numbers that you're seeing, there's this big debate over, is it worse than the flu? Is it similar to flu? Do you have, I know you're not an epidemiologist or a doctor, neither am I, but from the latest data that you've seen that you've been diving into, what's your take on the both the ability of this thing to spread comparatively to other diseases that we see that are like it, and the mortality rates? I mean, you mentioned Italy versus South Korea. How bad is it in South Korea?
Okay, so South Korea is the best case scenario. And the data that we have seen from South Korea reflects that if you get the coronavirus in South Korea, it doesn't matter how old you are, but obviously this impacts people a lot older, but 99.3 or 99.4% of all patients are recovering. That is, they are not dying, which would mean that 0.6 or 0.7% of people are dying from this. So that's the best case scenario, is what's going on in Korea, South Korea. And I tend to think that our medical system would be more similar to South Korea's than it would, say, to Italy's or certainly other countries. The fear that I think is out there is that the coronavirus, we're still learning the transmission rates. The World Health Organization has said that it is less contagious, the coronavirus is, than the flu. Okay, others have disagreed. I think this just reflects the fact that we're in a very early stage of understanding this disease. And so the question which is going to be asked, and I think will be utterly fascinating as we move forward, is why did Italy have the problems that they had? Now, maybe it's the fact that the country is older, right? Italy is one of the oldest countries in the world. They are very social in the way that they kiss, right? Like they are very close in terms of personal contact. They have a massive tourist crowd that was coming over from Asia. They may have had outbreaks that similarly broke out all at the same time. Their overall infrastructure at hospitals may be severely decrepit compared to other countries. I think this will be, for epidemiologists, an incredibly interesting study when all of this is passed, to try to figure out and learn for the future, what did South Korea do so well? What did Italy do so poorly? And which direction is the United States going to go in terms of being South Korea-like, where we basically end this outbreak before it has a systemic overlapping, deleterious effect for the country? Or are we going to spiral into a tailspin of ineptitude, much like has happened in Italy?
Now, do you think that it was the right move to cancel all these sporting events and arenas and stuff? I mean, if you were the professional sports czar for America, would you say, yeah, guys, we need to do this?
Well, I think Rudy Gobert put it all on steroids, because once you get a player who tests positive, then that team's going to have to be pulled out of competition. So I don't know that the NBA has any other options once Rudy Gobert tests positive. And I think that is why all these other leagues are acting the way they are, because they're saying, oh, we're going to have a player in the same situation as Rudy Gobert. Let's go ahead and keep this from happening. And I believe that is the biggest challenge that is out there, is we basically skipped a step. Because I think the step was going to go from no crowds, right, from crowds to no crowds, playing in front of no crowds. And I think that might have held for a month, or might have even been able to last for a long time, but for the fact that Rudy Gobert got the flu, which jumps you right from, well, playing in front of no crowds is not an option anymore. Let's just wipe out the whole season for suspension right now. Now, remember, it's not canceled, it's suspended. And so we'll see whether that suspension is lifted and we return to the rest of the season. Depends on how things go in the weeks and months ahead.
All right, everybody. You heard it from the man himself, Clay Travis. Check out his podcast, Outkick the Coverage. Check out his book, Republicans Buy Sneakers, too. Clay, thanks for making the time. Stay safe, hydrate, wash your hands.
Same for you, my man. I appreciate you having me on. Thanks.
What has Trump not done well about, or what has Trump not done to the satisfaction of liberals in terms of action around coronavirus? He lies. Okay. What does that mean? What has he lied about that has affected the response to coronavirus? You won't get an answer. In fact, Gavin Newsom, who's generally a rather slimy and dishonest political character, but look, balls and strikes. It's a promise I always make to you. I call it like it is. And when someone says the right thing, I say it's the right thing. When someone does a good thing, I say that too, even if I think they're generally terrible. This is what Gavin Newsom said about President Trump's assistance and communication to the state of California to deal with this. Play clip one.
Over the past couple of days, President Trump has said that he would prefer if none of the passengers aboard these cruises landed on U.S. soil. Did he mention any of that to you in your conversation?
Yeah, we had a private conversation, but he said we're going to do the right thing, and you have my support, all of our support, logistically and otherwise. So before he made those statements publicly, I had a private conversation with him around 4:30 West Coast time, and he said everything that I could have hoped for. And we had a very long conversation. and every single thing he said, they followed through on. So I'm just not interested in finding daylight on those statements, because every single thing his administration, and it starts at the top, including the vice president, has been consistent with the expectation that we repatriate these passengers, and we do it in a way that does justice to the spirit that defines the best of our country and the state of California.
I mean, give the man credit for that. That was a fair-minded statement. How many politicians have you heard of, like Governor Inslee from Washington, like a jerk after Pence called him to see how things were going up there, because Washington's been hit really hard by coronavirus so far, a lot of fatalities there. Like a jerk, Inslee goes on Twitter to make fun of Pence and the administration right after they're trying to help him out. And people say, oh, see, he's calling out no, he's being an idiot. Look, Gavin Newsom, I think, is wrong and terrible on a whole lot of things, but here his tone here and his response when the media's trying to bait him into trashing Trump because of the princess, what was it called? The princess something cruise, whatever it is. Diamond Princess, is that right? Anyway, yeah, whatever. Producer Mark is our cruise expert. Yeah, they would talk about the cruise. And that was a Trump moment, right? Trump goes, look, I wish they didn't have to land here. It just means our numbers are going to go up. And everyone's, oh, look what he said about that. And he's crazy. And, look, he's just being Trump. He was just sort of speaking off the cuff. He didn't mean anything. Coordinated with California. They dealt with it properly. Everything was done well. But see, this is where there's a huge disconnect between libs, the left, and those of us that appreciate what President Trump has been doing, not just on coronavirus, but in general. I look at what he does and what the impact of it is. They look at how he said the thing that he was going to do. Like, what were the words around the issue, right? You know, it would be kind of like if I was sitting here and I had a relative that was about to have heart surgery, and before the heart surgery, the doctor comes up to me and he's like, yeah, sometimes you got to pull out a heart and, like, make it beat, and you got to put it back in, and bada bing, bada boom. And I was like, oh, my gosh, did you hear? Well, if he goes in there and he does a perfect heart surgery, and my relative is now going to live 10 or 15 years longer because of it, do I care how he talked about it beforehand? Why am I supposed to care? This is the separation that libs and the left have from the rest of us on Trump. And they act like we're crazy because we say, okay, he did the right thing. Why do you keep trying? Because they want to be right so badly about him. Because to have to walk back all the things they've said about Trump, and he's a traitor and Russia and all this stuff, it's just too much. It's too much for their egos to bear. When people's egos are involved, it makes everything a whole lot more complicated. And the left's collective, I like using that word for them, the left's collective ego is completely invested in Trump being terrible. And so they'll never walk that back. They'll never tone that down, because it would mean that they've been wrong this whole time, and that they've been irresponsible in what they've been saying and how they've been assessing this president. So that's my my sense of that with Gavin Newsom. I mean, he said exactly the right thing, which is that they did the right stuff by us, and I'm not going to play this game right now. Now, tomorrow Newsom will probably say something terrible about the administration, but in that soundbite, I was like, oh, wow, he can be reasonable. But I had some lovely company over the weekend, and I did watch Dirty Dancing for the first time ever. I'd never seen that movie. I was not alone, so I don't need to hear any of the wisecracks about, why am I watching Dirty Dancing. I was at the request of a lady, but because I told her I'd never seen it, so we watched Dirty Dancing. Have you ever seen it?
I haven't. That's actually my wife's favorite movies, and I've somehow avoided ever seeing it.
Really?
Yeah.
How do you avoid? How is Mrs. Mark loving that movie so much, and you avoid? I mean,
I just found.
I'm not married. I'm not even engaged, and I was told that it's time to see it.
So we're packing, and I just found a DVD of it too. So we have it in the house, and I just somehow.
I will save you a little bit here in telling you, you will not like it.
It's not good.
It's not that it's not good. It's fine for what it is. Put aside the politics, because an abortion is kind of central to the whole thing. But anyway. But just as a piece of entertainment, the music is good. I will say that.
Sure.
And the only thing I will say that's cool about watching is if you've never seen Dirty Dancing before and you watch it, or if you haven't seen it in a long time and you watch it, you can go back and watch the Movies That Made Us on Netflix, which is a 40-minute behind the scenes of how they made it. It's kind of crazy that they pulled this thing together. It was basically this company that specialized in VHS rental. That I think it was called like Valtron or something. I forget what it's called. But they they decided they were going to make a movie, and this was the first movie they had ever made. So they went from being a VHS direct-to-rental country to being a direct-to-rental company, to saying that, okay, we're actually just going to make a movie. We've never done this before. We have no idea what we're doing. And the first movie they made was Dirty Dancing, which is pretty amazing.
You know what that sounds like, right?
What?
Netflix.
Oh, with
everything.
Well, yeah.
They went from being the DVD rental company to this media conglomerate.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. You're right, actually. Yeah. And Netflix's first show, House of Cards, was a huge hit. So just the story of it, the story of it alone is really interesting, and also how it was super low budget. It was a low budget movie, $4 million.
Wow, that's nothing in today's term.
Yeah, and $4 million in 1987. It made over $200 million.
Wow.
Around the world. So I thought that I'm trying to find the name of the because they made a few other movies after it that were utterly horrible, and the company shut down in a few. Vestron, I said Valtron. Vestron was the name of the company. And it's just fun to watch the story of how they pulled this whole thing together, because they got lightning in a bottle the first time out, and then it was just disaster after disaster.
I'd probably be more interested in that than watching the movie.
I liked watching the movie just because then I could watch the behind the scenes and understand more of it. And there's just some great stuff. I mean, you also see how like the budget constraints that they had, how they were able to. They took over like a boys' summer camp for a while and pretended that was the resort. It's supposed to be like this fancy resort, because you think about it, you're like, that wasn't a very fancy looking resort in some of the scenes. Anyway, I'd never seen Dirty Dancing before, so I did watch it. I did watch it over the weekend, which was fun. Had some breaking news. We're going to have breaking news throughout the show, I think, on this. The Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, is now self-isolating over coronavirus. Fears. He's not been confirmed to have it, but he's self-isolating because of concern that he may have been in contact.
His wife has flu-like symptoms, so they're testing her. That's why.
Yeah. And I'm not trying to be even glib or funny about this at all. Now you recognize more than ever how much you touch your face. And I'm sitting here and I'm doing a radio show, and we also broadcast it on Pluto TV, and it's really hard to not touch your face. Trudeau is the first head of state that I know of who has been. Look, we don't know if his wife has coronavirus. There's still flu out there, so there are people that have very similar symptom profiles to those with coronavirus who actually have standard influenza, which I would note is also not anything to be taken lightly. But we're just not. We know more about it. We know that it's considered a less serious disease than coronavirus at this point. So it's possible that his wife has just the flu, but obviously everyone right now is very concerned that anything that seems like it's flu is going to be. And also, look, I'm not trying to make some big political statement. Coronavirus is a family of viruses. That's not really it should be called Wuhan virus, so we know what we're talking about. Wuhan virus is what causes COVID-19, and no one really is going to call it COVID-19. So I'm not trying to make some big political statement. I just think that we call all these other diseases. I don't know why all of a sudden we're supposed to change. I mean, it should be called the Wuhan virus. But this is just, you got a head of state of a country right next door, our close friends, our brothers and sisters in Canada, and this is clearly going to get a lot of attention, because if the wife has COVID, see, I just did it. If the wife has, I guess we're going to keep calling it coronavirus till we all agree we can call it something else. But if the wife has the virus, then there's a very good possibility that the Prime Minister of Canada, now, as we all know, he is young and healthy. So chances are he would have, statistically speaking, something like a cold. It wouldn't be, that's what 80% of people have. They have some shortness of breath, they have a cold, and, it attacks their system, but they're okay. But there are other heads of state, including in this one, who are at an elevated risk profile because of their age. I didn't even mention this at the start of the show. There's so many things. They've shut Capitol Hill and the Pentagon from visitors, so they're still conducting business, but there have been some staffers on Capitol Hill who have come down, some Senate staffers, I believe, and there'll be more. I mean, if there's a couple of Senate staffers, there's going to be more Senate staffers. They're all moving around the same hallways, breathing the same air, interacting in these places. So it's very likely that you're going to see a number spike on Capitol Hill of confirmed cases. And we're, Tom Hanks has it. We're going to see more people who you would think, oh, they don't have to worry. And I know that no one consciously thinks about this, but you think about very influential, powerful celebrities and politicians. It's easy to get in your head, well, they're not somebody that has to really worry about this. I mean, I'm pretty sure the flu actually killed a czar of Russia in the 19th century, and that's just off the top of my head. I mean, this stuff happens. Very famous, very powerful, very influential people can succumb to this. I mean, this is a human condition that we're all so concerned about. This is any human being is susceptible to this, and unless you are in a hermetically sealed box and having somebody bring you food that has been sterilized all the time, I mean, no one is perfectly safe from this. And I worry that that there are some panic points that I think are coming. The panic points are going to revolve around let's just say it, if Trump or Biden or Bernie or Schumer or Pelosi or McConnell or any of the notice I'm picking those names. Those are all not just powerful politicians in this country. They're all older. Have you seen the bad coronavirus cures? The things that people are putting out there yet?
I have.
Which is the dumbest to you?
I think masturbation was on there.
Wow.
I mean, come on, that is the dumbest.
I didn't know it was on there. Circle gets the square. that's yeah. Woo! I didn't know that was one of them. Man, people really do need to
cocaine was on there.
They need to get a grip about this stuff. I mean, cocaine is on there. That's one that I saw. Wait, here, the bad coronavirus cures: snorting cocaine and drinking bleach. Here's a public service announcement. If you had Ebola virus, I would tell you that drinking a large quantity of bleach was in fact even more dangerous than having Ebola virus, because you'll probably die in a matter of a couple of hours. What is wrong with people? How does this stuff get circulated?
I really want to know if somebody drank bleach.
Oh, I'm sure people do. People are eating the Tide Pods for a while.
That's a good point.
People do this stuff.
Why?
Because if it's on the internet, it must be true. Snorting cocaine, drinking bleach, apparently autoerotica, which I think is how the scientists describe it. These are all fake things that are also some kind of like a colloidal silver or something I've seen, which I don't even really know what. I think that's like liquid silver.
I think people are just so stupid they see a meme,
and
they don't realize it's not true.
People have called in, huge doses of different vitamins, all this stuff, dangerous, bad, doesn't work. Trust me on this one. If there was some cool immunity, keeping your immunity high, getting enough sleep, getting enough rest, that's very important. That's good. You got to do those things. You want to keep your immune system as strong as you can, but that's a very holistic approach. That takes a lot of things. This other stuff they're talking about, like a miracle cure for this, no. Wow, drink. This is nuts. There's a lot of there's, as you know, a ton of irresponsible stuff on the internet, and just some other things that are going on right now about coronavirus. The markets are really waiting on the bailouts. Are the bailouts actually going to happen or not? We have to see. I think that there will be major government action. The government's going to take out the checkbook and start really propping up industries, and that'll be interesting. I've already talked about the toilet paper thing. It's in Australia too. Other countries, people are panic. So the problem with panic buying is it begets more panic buying. Now I'm somebody who's like, if I see a lot of nice high quality, like the toilet paper with the little bear that's rubbing its face with it or whatever, right? Isn't that, or is that the Downy fabric softener? I'm confused.
I believe that's Charmin.
Charmin. Yeah, no, that is toilet paper, right?
Yeah, Charmin toilet paper.
Yeah. I want the little bear with the thing that's rubbing on the face.
You want to use a bear as toilet paper?
No, but I'm saying that's the insignia of the nice toilet paper. The others. I'm not going to start calling out brands that are bad, but there are some toilet paper brands where.
Oh yeah.
And it's like what they have at institutions, like what they'd have in a university library. You never liked that toilet paper.
My in-laws have really bad plumbing, so they have like the 1-ply bad toilet. I can't do that.
Yeah, you end up wrapping that stuff around your hand like you're a mummy. You end up really using
you're basically
a lot more
wiping
of it.
with your hand.
Whoa, hey. No, I just go through a whole roll of toilet paper if I have to. We gotta keep it clean. So there's a toilet paper issue. This had nothing to do with coronavirus, but as I was looking for updates, health updates, they've also, thank you, science, they've also discovered a completely new strain of chlamydia under the ice in the Arctic. I want to be like, guys, one thing at a time. All right, we're already dealing with coronavirus. We don't need some new super strain of chlamydia that you found drilling in the Arctic. This is a real thing. It's like, let's keep the chlamydia in the Arctic under the ice where it belongs. Let's not disturb it. Start spreading it around. So, just look, I want the public health to be good. I think it's important. And there's also now an effort underway in the city of Newark is saying, we were talking about disinformation around this. The city of Newark is saying that if they find people spreading disinformation about coronavirus, they're going to arrest them. I'm like, well, under what authority do they have to do that? That was very Big Brother. That was a little bit of a surprise. So look, we're following this. We're on it. I will say this, and maybe we should mark this down as a prediction. I think we're going to be okay. I don't think this is going to be as bad as a lot of people are suggesting it will be overall. We're going to have a day, I'd say in the next 2 to 3 weeks, we're going to have a day where this is really scary. And I'm going to have to come in here and say, all right, everybody, deep breath. I know, we got a lot of infections. It's going to happen. Be prepared for that. Now, that doesn't mean that it's going to be as out of control and as bad as other people have been saying, but we are not out of the woods. We're going to be sometime, I'd say, the first week of April. It's going to get ugly out there. It's going to get ugly, and then it's going to recede, and we'll be okay. But get ready for it. But don't panic buy toilet paper. You don't need enough toilet paper for 6 months.
The number was obnoxious. There are murderers who will get out of court faster than Harvey Weinstein will. That number spoke to the pressure of movements and the public. That number did not speak to the evidence that came out at trial. That number did not speak to the testimony that we heard. That number did not speak to evidence, nor did it speak to justice. I am overcome with anger at that number. I think that number is a cowardly number to give. I think the judge caved, just as I believe the jury caved, and I am not happy.
That was the defense. Now, I understand there's always a little bit of a balancing act you have to do here when you're playing sound bites. That was clearly the lawyer for Weinstein, and I know there's a whole other side to this, the side that won the prosecution. But that's just the sound that we had in reference to Weinstein getting 23 years in prison for the sexual assault of 2 women, years ago. And look, Weinstein, who is a super powerful Democrat, bundler for Hillary, friend of the Obamas, friend of Hillary and Bill Clinton, raised millions of dollars for Democrat causes. This guy was the elite lib establishment to a T. Don't forget that. But, he's a bad guy. All right. I don't like his politics. He's clearly a bad human being. And I do think he's getting what he deserves insofar as he should be punished for, sexual assault on women. I mean, the things that he did, if somebody who wasn't Harvey Weinstein did, would people be saying, yeah, you can't throw a woman down, and when she's saying, no against her will, keep doing things and keep. So, I think Harvey Weinstein is going away, and that's a good thing. 23 years, if we're talking about sexual assault sentences, and the severity of this, 23 years seems like it is longer than most people will get for killing somebody. That's true. It's a lot longer than a lot of people get for manslaughter. It's longer than people will often serve for murder, too. So, usually that's 25 to life, but people will get parole. Now, maybe Harvey Weinstein would get parole, too, but he's in his 60s. If this is his sentence, he's appealing it, but he's going to die in prison. Now, I don't like Harvey Weinstein. I have nothing favorable to say about this guy. I think he's an extreme dirtbag, and I think he did assault women. I don't think it was just that he was dangling in front of them the prospect of a better career or whatever, and that they just consented. I think that he, physically transgressed, and then would try to cover it up with, oh no, I just thought that was okay. And, essentially he was like a habituated date rapist in a sense, right? So he was habitually doing this, which is why they tried to charge him with being a sexual predator, which would have sent him to prison for life. But I can't help but notice that this reminds me, in the early, Harvey Weinstein was one of the first big Me Too cases that came up. And there are a lot of very powerful people that protected this guy, that covered up for him, and they will never be held to account for it. Remember that. NBC News will never be held to account for killing this story. They didn't want to mess with Harvey Weinstein. Weinstein was hiring all these private eyes and detectives and stuff, too, to go after him. He's a really scary, really bad guy. So, okay, fine. Rot in hell, Harvey Weinstein. No problem with that. The sentence does feel like it's there's a little bit of a political message being sent as well for the Me Too era and all that. I mean, if he got 10 years, I'd say, yeah, that's what I would have guessed, 10 to 15. How much do we really care, though? The guy's in his late 60s. I mean, if he serves 15 years, he's really not going to spend much time on the outside anyway. All that said, though, I've said this before, and this is separate from the specifics of, or rather, I'm separating myself from the specifics of the Weinstein case here to this one factoid, which is that now Weinstein's case has established that a woman can claim years after the fact that she had a consensual sexual relationship with somebody, and at some point or any point before or during that admittedly consensual sexual relationship, that person, that man, committed a felony rape assault for which his life should be ruined and he should go to prison for decades. In Harvey Weinstein's case, that seems like it's probably true and appropriate, right? Like that's okay, he's a bad guy. Do any of you doubt, given what we saw with Kavanaugh, which was when Ronan Farrow was called into service on that one, a lot of the Me Too machinery they tried to use to throw at Kavanaugh to destroy him. At some point, and I can't tell you when, and people might forget that I'm making this prediction, but just give it some time, you will have a very powerful movement, a person who is important for the left to destroy. Will have a woman come forward who has had who had an admittedly consensual sexual relationship with that person, and she will claim that one night when they were maybe a little drunk or they'd had a fight and he thought it was okay, and she said you'll get it. There'll be this sort of gray area thing, and they'll say which usually would be adjudicated in a way where you'd say, okay, well, I mean, if you think that somebody did this and the next day you tell them you love them and you continue to have sex with them for the next 5 years, how did they really commit a felony rape against that person? That would have been the thinking before. The thinking now will be different. You're going to have some guy. I'm guaranteeing you, if this happens, it will be somebody the left wants to destroy. And you'll have a woman come forward and say that there was that I had a long-term sexual relationship with this person, but one time he raped me, and the entire apparatus will come forward and say, rapist must be destroyed. And now, is it possible to rape somebody in the confines of a marriage? Of course it is, right? I'm not saying this isn't possible. I'm just saying that it will no longer be considered really a defense if the person the next day was saying, literally, I love you, you're my sun, my moon, and my stars, and we need to continue to have sex together, and everything is fine. That did not sway the jury in the Weinstein case. That seems to me to be a change in the way that we'll be thinking about these kinds of trials going forward, but it's only going to be a change that is unjust when it is applied for reasons of essentially, assassinating someone's character for political reasons. It's going to happen. This is going to be the new, the next time it won't, because and really, in a sense, they tried something. They tried this, having women come forward to lie about Kavanaugh. That was a political hit. They were liars. There were women who were delusional, but they were weaponized by the left to take down a very important target. What you're going to have will be somebody who, people get very angry when relationships end. People get very angry after a divorce, messy divorce. And if, a target of the left, if they can find someone who, really hates. I mean, I know people who have tried to get their exes thrown into prison. I know people who have, lied to the police about. I mean, people do really bad stuff here. Now you can say, oh, yeah, well, this one time, I said no, and he didn't listen, and he raped me. And even though we lived a happy life for 5 years after the fact, and we were, married even or whatever, nope, that one time, I want that adjudicated. Now that we're divorced and I hate him, and he's a high-profile target for whatever reason, I want that adjudicated as a rape claim. Look, we had Christine Blasey Ford come forward, could not even prove that she had ever met Kavanaugh. Never mind that he'd assaulted her. Nobody could even prove that even ever happened. That they were in the same place. Didn't know where it was, didn't know when it was, didn't know how she got home. But the narrative was, yep, no, he assaulted me. And everyone said, oh, she must be believed, even though the facts were all that she shouldn't be believed. Now think about how easy it will be if someone chooses to say, if they are scorned or if they hate somebody they used to have a relationship with and they really want to get even. And this does happen in life. This does happen. There was one time when, and even though the relationship continued, I was very happy and said I was very happy and we continued to have a sexual relationship. There was this one time. That's a legacy of this case that I don't think a lot of people see, and maybe I could be wrong. Maybe this is just a one-off and the dirtbag Harvey Weinstein goes away forever and, everything is fine. This never happens. But I used to go on radio saying they were going to weaponize Me Too, and they did against Kavanaugh. I could see this getting added into that. That's all I'm making a prediction about the future, not a commentary on specifically whether Weinstein's guilty. I think Weinstein is guilty. But in terms of what's going to happen going forward, this case has real ramifications. We keep calling it coronavirus. That's imprecise. And the actual affliction, this is a little bit like the distinction between HIV and AIDS, right? HIV is the virus, human immunodeficiency virus that causes the autoimmune deficiency syndrome of AIDS. And, we have a strain of coronavirus causes COVID-19, which is what they are calling, that's the more official name for this. But to call it coronavirus doesn't really make sense because there's a lot of coronaviruses. And there have been a lot of coronaviruses in the past, and SARS and MERS and these different outbreaks of upper respiratory infections caused by viruses stretching back now for a couple of decades. We've been seeing this. So there's a movement out there to maybe just come up with a more descriptive, more specific name that people can use in common usage. And I saw people saying that this should maybe be called the Wuhan virus for Wuhan city, the Wuhan city in China where this first showed up. Also happened to be very near the Special Virology Institute in Wuhan, which is the only place where they keep hundreds of live viruses where we are told this is entirely coincidence. It perhaps is entirely coincidence. It's a big coincidence. But the Wuhan virus is something that has been making the rounds. And sure enough, the left jumped on this because virtue signaling is the water in which the left swims, right? Virtue signaling is everything to them. They started immediately, Chris Hayes at MSNBC, who's just, I don't know, deeply unimpressive guy, gets paid a lot of money to tell libs what they want to hear. But he said that this was racist to call it Wuhan virus. And you're hearing this from people, oh, it's so racist. That's really interesting. It also is one of these moments where you get a reminder of how ignorant our media class that pretends to be so knowledgeable about everything all the time, pretend to have the answers, pretend to be smart, pretend to be well-read. Calling it the Wuhan virus is racist, but is it racist to call it Ebola? Because Ebola is named after a river in Central Africa where they first found the disease. Is it racist to call it West Nile virus? Because, the Nile River, that's actually where that came from. Is it racist to call it Zika, which I believe also originated in Africa, named for either a river or a region? Is it racist to call it Lyme disease, literally named for Lyme, Connecticut? Oh, good heavens! Not named after Lyme. Yeah, named after Lyme, Connecticut. Which I remember growing up with that. That was a disease that had people really on edge. There were concerns that they couldn't treat it very well, and that we were all getting Lyme disease from ticks from just walking around in the grass. We all forget this now, but in the 90s, Lyme disease had a lot of people on edge. Less so now. It's still a very serious disease if you get it. But so diseases are named the Spanish flu. which doesn't really come from Spain, but Spain was one of the first places after the First World War that allowed coverage of it in the press, in the media, so it got called the Spanish flu. But again, this is just these are unserious people in the media. They don't know anything. They're not knowledgeable. They don't care to impart real wisdom or expertise to the public. It's all just like, look at me, I'm so great, I'm so smart all the time from these idiots. Calling it Wuhan virus is not racist, and to say that is parading one's own ignorance. But lots of libs over the weekend went into that. Oh, how dare you call it Wuhan virus? Come up with a more creative name like Ebola, named after the river in the Congo region of Africa. Yeah, that's libs for you, folks. Shaking their finger at you, yelling at you, calling you names when really they're just showing how ignorant they are. Okay, this was on respiratory fitness. I thought this was fascinating, and for America, you have to put this in the overall plus column in terms of our ability to withstand the spread of this disease. This is from Carl Quintanilla, who is a reporter anchor at CNBC. And he says the two most important parameters in respiratory fitness. This really matters, right? Because this disease goes for the lungs. That is the way that this is taking people, taking them out where they have to go to the hospital, and then even some people don't make it through, don't win the fight in the hospital, even if they have intubation, if they're in the ICU. So respiratory fitness is really important. And he says the two most important factors in that are, one of these is an individual. And look, I have a lot of sympathy for people that have any kind of an addiction. I get it. But I'm just looking at the numbers here, looking at the aggregate of what we're facing, whether the person smokes cigarettes. It's very, very important when you're gauging their respiratory fitness. So I'm telling you this because I know there's a lot of Team Buck that you smoke, and I'm just looking out for you. You have to consider yourself, if you're a smoker, in a higher risk, even if you're a 35-year-old or a 30-year-old smoker. You got to consider yourself to be in a higher risk category in this. So please take those precautions that people are talking about. I know it's like a little counterintuitive, but if you're a long-time smoker, I mean, not if you smoke one cigarette a month or something, but if you're a long-time smoker and you're in your 30s and your 40s and your 50s, you got to think about this like this disease is going to come after you very, very possibly like somebody who's in their 70s or their 80s in terms of your ability for your lungs to fight back against this. So you got to be very careful. And the pollution level is the other part of this. That's also a really important indicator for how well. Remember, I was in China, as I said, a year ago, and I was leaving Shanghai, which usually is not as badly polluted as Beijing. And it is like something out of a post-apocalyptic movie and it was still there. And it's apparently a lot better than it used to be. But you can see this, I can't even really explain it to you. I mean, it just looks like a collection of smog. And when the sun's going down, it kind of bounces off it in a not appealing way. And, you have this goo that's all in the air. It's just pollution. And by the way, I'm all about conservation. I'm against pollution. I'm just not against CO2, which plants rely on for air. And, that's CO2 is not a pollutant, but we all have to pretend because the green movement is insane. Pollution is bad. And I'm all like, no, we do not want these, industrial facilities spewing out acrid smoke that hurts your lungs. And, we breathe out CO2. So how much of a pollutant is it really, folks? Let's think about that for a second. It's literally coming out of your body every second, and we're supposed to think that's pollution anyway. Don't get me started on that. These days, I'll tell you, there's a part of me, I don't know, I'm a little rebel. You know what I'm not doing these days? As we're all like in lockdown and trying to stay alive and worried about our loved ones? No, they can come after me for the not recycling. Sorry, not doing it. It's going right in the trash. I'm sorry. I don't want to hear about it. More important things. Recycle. All right, so on smoking and on pollution, the smoking rate and the average pollution levels. Here's what you got country by country. China, smoking rate, 47%. Average pollution level, 41%. South Korea, smoking rate, 49%. Average pollution level, 24%. Iran, smoking rate, 21%. Average pollution level, 24%. Italy, 28 smoking rate. Pollution, 14. United States, smoking, 19. Pollution, 9. This matters. We have a lower percentage of smokers, and we have, and this is probably the most important in terms of looking at the aggregate numbers and how this will affect the population of this country overall, we have much cleaner air than these other countries. Now, I know this seems like, how can this really matter? This is what it all comes down to is, can your lungs get enough oxygen to the rest of your body if and when this thing attacks you? And your lungs, if you are dealing with daily pollution all the time, your lung capacity is affected and the strain on your lungs is already higher. So this is not like, oh, we're great, it's America, we got clean air, so we're not. No, of course, this has still killed people in this country. I think it just killed the first person in New Jersey. It's killed a bunch of seniors out in Washington State, but we're in better shape than a lot of these countries we've already seen from day one because of the health of our population and because of the age of our population. Italy's population is much older than ours, as a percentage, and then also pollution. Just to give you a little bit of a breather, a little bit of a pause in all the Wuhan, and I haven't even gotten into the reason why we should call it that. And I keep meaning to, and team, there's so much, and look, we're going to be in this together. We're in this every day until this thing is passed. So shields high for real. This was a story that I thought was just worth taking a moment to look at. Andrew Gillum. You may remember Andrew Gillum. He was a very celebrated by the media gubernatorial candidate for the state of Florida, very important state, as we all know, for a lot of reasons. And he was the mayor of Tallahassee, which, as I understand it, is not a particularly well-run city. It's got a city with some problems. But it turned, and I think now he's a CNN contributor, or he was, because, CNN, if you become a famous Democrat running for office, the first thing you move when you lose is you just go to Jeff Zucker and he starts writing you checks. Turns out that this is breaking news from today. Andrew Gillum was, quote, in an inebriated state on the scene of a possible drug overdose at the Mondrian South Beach Hotel early this morning, with clear plastic baggies containing suspected crystal meth. Not only was he the Democrats, and he came close to winning, the Democrats' favorite. I mean, the media loved this guy. He was their choice for the governor of California. Governor of Florida. But he also was talked about by some people as a possible VP candidate. And look, if this was like 15 years ago and he was a young guy and this happened and we found this out later, I'd be like, hey, I know drugs are bad. ODing is very serious. I get all that. But, I think we're living at a time now where we are more forgiving of people's youthful indiscretions than we used to be. Unless it's Kavanaugh, and then we make up indiscretions that didn't happen, and we make up assaults that didn't happen. But, in general, I think but not if you're being actively talked about as a possible VP candidate. Then you probably shouldn't be in an inebriated state at a drug overdose scene at the Mondrian South Beach, a hotel I've been to, by the way, which, let me tell you, the party never stops there. The place is lit AF for sure. That's where the party happens. I'll just tell you, it's a lot of unts at the Mondrian and at what's that other, the SLS. Whew, man, you better put your party shoes on if you go to the SLS in South Beach. I can tell you that much. So Andrew Gillum, we'll see if this ends up being what it looks like. But yeah, that's a real thing that's going on right now. That's a news story for you that has nothing to do with Wuhan virus. Hey, Team Buck, thank you so much for watching The First on YouTube. If you like this video, please click that little thumbs up button so then it will log as liked. And also, if you want to see more great content from The First, please click subscribe.